Good afternoon, everyone. We might get underway. I'm doing this from the shadows today. Hopefully you can hear me okay. I'm Mark Pearce. I'm the CEO of Volunteering Australia. My camera isn't working today, but hopefully my voice is coming through loud and clear. I would like to start by acknowledging the traditional custodians of the lands we're all meeting on today. I'm in what we term today Brisbane, Meanjin, in Queensland, on the lands of the Turrbal and Yagara people. I pay my respects to elders past and present. I extend those respects to Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander elders throughout this country. I'd like to acknowledge the ongoing connection to country, to ceremony and to tradition, and note the custodianship of Aboriginal and or Torres Strait Islander people in this part of the world. It's a great pleasure to be with you this afternoon. We are going to spend a bit of time talking today about the National Strategy for Volunteering. Of course, we launched the National Strategy at the National Volunteering Conference in February of this year. For those who were there, this is an opportunity to explore it a bit more deeply. For those who weren't and haven't had an opportunity to read the strategy, this is an opportunity to jump in and understand it and ask some questions. We'll be utilising the chat function and the Q&A function as well. Certainly drop questions, comments in there as we go through today. We are recording this just for everyone's knowledge. I'd like to acknowledge also the attendance of my colleagues from the State and Territory volunteering peak bodies and also from Government, Department of Social Services and some of the other departments as well. Thank you for your attendance today. We'll be hearing today from Volunteering Australia's Deputy CEO and Policy Director, Dr. Sue Regan, and also from Volunteering Australia's Policy Officer and National Strategy Research Fellow, Jack McDermott. As I said, use the chat function, use the Q&A function, and at that point, I will hand over and say, Sue Regan, all yours.
Thank you, Mark. I hope everyone can hear me and see me. I'm going to be presenting what's in the strategy, talk about the vision, the focus areas, go into the strategic objectives, and also highlight some hidden gems in the document that you may not have come across. And Jack will be presenting the evidence that informed the strategy. But I'm actually going to start really at the end and talk about what's next, because I thought it would be helpful to have this in mind as we think about the detail of the strategy. So Volunteering Australia has received some funding from the federal government to coordinate this next phase, the establishment phase of the national strategy, which has these four elements: the development of a governance blueprint, the development of a monitoring and evaluation framework, the co-design of the first 3-year action plan, and the development of a model for shared accountability for implementation. These are the vital next steps in enacting the strategy, and I hope you will come on the journey with us to take these elements forward. But this strategy belongs to all of us. It's co-owned, it was co-designed, and we can all start using the national strategy to guide our work. This, I think, is one of the little hidden gems from the national strategy, which is on page 14, which is how to use the national strategy. And I think it just gives us some ideas for how you all might use the national strategy. And that includes us at Volunteering Australia. So, for example, we're already using the strategic objectives in our policy and advocacy work. And beyond our role in coordinating the establishment phase, we're also using the national strategy to inform our own strategic planning and thinking, and looking at what the national strategy means for our role as the national peak body for volunteering and how we should adapt. So I'd encourage everyone to think about how the national strategy might be useful for your own work and your own organisations. Now, I'm going to talk mainly today about what's in the strategy, but I did think it was important to remind everyone of how we got to where we are today. This will be familiar to many of you, I suspect, so I'm going to do a kind of potted version, a 1-minute version of how the strategy was developed. And I would like to take this opportunity, because I know many of you are in this virtual room, to thank everyone who contributed significant amounts of time and expertise to developing the strategy last year. And I also want to thank and celebrate Sarah Wilson, who's the current National Strategy Director, who will be known to many of you and who is currently taking some well-deserved leave. So this was the project vision: to deliver a national strategy for volunteering designed and owned by the volunteering ecosystem that will provide a blueprint for a reimagined future for volunteering in Australia. And I want to stress that this strategy was designed and is owned by all of us. It's not a national strategy owned by the federal government. It's not a Volunteering Australia strategy. It is owned by all of us. And there, I believe, and I'm sure many of you will too, really lies its power. So just quickly to run through what happened last year, I promise this is a short recap. We undertook an extensive co-design process last year. So we started with no preconceived views about what the strategy should look like or contain. And we wanted to hear from everyone, who is involved in and in enabling volunteering. So we went through this process of discovery, visioning, build, test and refine. The findings from the discovery phase were published as a separate document, and I encourage all of you to read the Discovery Insights report if you haven't already. I think it's a very engaging and provocative read, and really captures, I think, the current state of volunteering, its complexities and nuances, and breadth of opportunities that lie ahead. The visioning phase involved Sarah Wilson working closely with the state and territory peak volunteering bodies to engage people all across Australia to really reimagine what volunteering could and should look like in the future. Then the build phase brought this all together with the evidence. I'll go back one, sorry. With the evidence review, which Jack's going to talk about shortly, and through the hard work of the core design team, the draft national strategy was born. There was then a test and refine phase. And as Mark mentioned, this culminated in the launch of the new National Strategy for Volunteering at the National Volunteering Conference in February this year. So I'm going to set out the vision, focus areas and aims and the strategic objectives. But as I mentioned, I also wanted to draw your attention to some other aspects of the national strategy, which will be really important for its success. The first of these is the why. Why do we need a national strategy? What's the purpose of the national strategy? This is a summary of what's on page 9 of the document. So the national strategy is a 10-year blueprint. It's a guide that can steer both our individual and collective actions. And it provides a clear and compelling case for change. This is its purpose. It's a guide for us all to creating a better future for volunteering in Australia. I also wanted to highlight the guiding principles. This is on page 35 of the document, which really should enable the strategy to be dynamic going forward, responding to trends, building upon evidence, expertise, and evolving practice. So the national strategy will continue to take an evidence-based approach. It was developed through a co-design process, and we think it's important that co-design and ongoing dialogue is vital to enacting the national strategy. Achieving the vision will require diverse stakeholders to unite around a shared agenda and to collaborate. We all need to have an openness to experimentation and adaptability. And this is all underpinned really by a commitment to investment in continuous improvement. So these are the guiding principles that will be guiding us going forward. Now, I do want to go to the heart of the strategy. So let's move on to the vision. The vision for the national strategy is that by 2033, volunteering is the heart of Australian communities. We wanted a vision which reflected the diverse perspectives of the co-design process, and a vision that speaks to and resonates with as many people as possible across the volunteering ecosystem. So we have these underpinning elements of the vision. So we want a future where more people volunteer more often, where volunteers are respected and know they're making a difference, where volunteering is valued and recognised in policy, in operations, in strategic settings, where we celebrate and invest in diversity, where individually and collectively we are meeting our potential in creating thriving communities. We hope that this vision or elements of this vision really capture what is important to all of you for the future of volunteering. The next slide is, and I'm going to focus now on the focus areas and the aims. So there's 3 of these. The first focus captures the importance of enhancing the volunteer experience. So putting this front and centre and ensuring that volunteering is inclusive, accessible, and not exploitative. The second focus area is about the community and social impact. So this is really trying to capture that volunteering is at the core of societal and community well-being, and that, yes, we need to focus on this wider community and social impact of volunteering. The third focus area captures the broader conditions that will enable volunteering to thrive and have greater impact. So that's the importance of management and leadership, policy conditions, research and investment. Jack and I were discussing the other day that we might develop a diagram to visualize the focus areas and aims, with the individual volunteering experience in the middle, then the shift to the community and social impact, then the focus on the wider conditions for volunteering to thrive. Anyway, watch this space on that. I'm now going to talk about the strategic objectives. And for me, this is where the national strategy really comes alive, because this is what needs to change in order for us to realise the vision and aims. So there are several strategic objectives that sit under each focus area. These are the strategic objectives are set out in some detail in the document from page 42 onwards. And I think Jack's going to say a bit more about this and how the evidence informed the strategic objectives. But I'm going to run through each of the 11 strategic objectives to give you a good sense of what they are about. They all came from the co-design process, so hopefully they will resonate with many of you. So under the first focus area, we have 3 strategic objectives. The first, 1.1, is about ensuring that volunteers have a meaningful, enriching experience. So it's about the volunteer experience, that they feel valued and they know that they are making a difference. The second, 1.2, is about making volunteering more inclusive and accessible to everyone. The third, 1.3, is about ensuring that we don't exploit volunteers and that we have supports in place to protect their safety, their interests and their well-being. So they're the 3 strategic objectives that sit under the first aim. Under the second focus area, we have 4 strategic objectives. The first one, 2.1, is about diversifying our understanding of volunteering. and really ensuring that in all of its forms, volunteering is respected and supported. The second is about expanding public understanding and perceptions of what volunteering is, what it can be, and the different ways that it takes place across the country. The third is about recognizing the inherent or intrinsic value of volunteering. So it's not only a means of achieving another end or objective, as important as they are, such as employment or service delivery goals. This is really about recognizing that inherent value of volunteering. The fourth, 2.4, is about supporting people and communities to respond to their own challenges and opportunities through volunteering. So it's enabling this community-led approach. So that's the second focus area and the strategic objectives that underpin it. Under the third focus area, we have a set of objectives about these wider conditions for volunteering to thrive. The first is about making volunteering a cross-portfolio issue within government, so that there's full recognition for how volunteering supports a myriad of government priorities and services, from aged care to mental health, from environmental protection to sport and more. The second objective here is about strengthening leadership across volunteering and considering how accountability can be systematically shared. The third objective, 3.3, is about committing to strategic, not piecemeal investment, so that we have fit for purpose infrastructure, and this includes for research and data, for policy, for tools and resources. And the fourth strategic objective here is about recognizing and investing in the critical role of volunteer managers, because as we all know, I think in this room, volunteering does not just happen. So this objective focuses our attention on the time, the talent, the skill required in volunteer management. So they're the strategic objectives, and I think Jack is going to talk a little bit about a couple of those in more detail. And of course, just to make the point, and this is made in the document itself, that these strategic objectives are interdependent in many respects, and we will need to be very mindful of this when we develop the action plans, and each of us progresses our work on the national strategy. The strategic objectives, as I said, are evidence-based. So on that point, I am going to hand over to Jack, who will talk about this.
Hi everyone, and thanks Sue. So as Sue mentioned, the National Strategy for Volunteering is underpinned by a strong base of research. So research evidence was collated through an original research project, the Volunteering in Australia research, and a series of volunteering research papers which capture evidence on an array of topics that relate to volunteering. So I thought I'd talk today briefly about each of these projects and summarise some of the key findings about volunteering in Australia, and then to talk more about how this evidence informed the national strategy itself, including where evidence can be found in the strategy, so where to kind of look for the research that informed the strategy, and then also how evidence was considered in the development of the strategy itself. So the Volunteering in Australia research is a series of 2 reports that were undertaken in 2022 to collect contemporary data on volunteering in Australia. The research consists of 2 reports, a report on the volunteer perspective, which was undertaken by the ANU Centre for Social Research and Methods, based on a representative sample of about 3,500 people in Australia, which included 1,100 volunteers, and then a report on the organisation perspective, which was based on a survey of 1,345 representatives of volunteer involving organisations, and then a series of focus groups to capture a bit more detail on the contemporary challenges facing VAOs in Australia. I'll just highlight some of the very headline findings. So we found that 26.7% of people in Australia had undertaken formal volunteering, and just under half, so 46.5%, had undertaken informal volunteering. Combined, over half of Australians had undertaken either formal or informal volunteering. We also found that the proportion of adults who volunteered formally had decreased significantly during COVID, from about 36% in 2019 to just over a quarter in April 2022, which equates to around 1.86 million fewer volunteers. But we also note in the report that the rate of volunteering had been declining pre-COVID as well, since about 2010. At the same time, demand for volunteers remains quite high, with most respondents from volunteer involving organisations, about 83%, reporting that their organisation needed more volunteers immediately or in the near future. As of last year, we also found that COVID was still the main driver for change in VIOs, though shifts in volunteering styles, population changes, and technological changes were also quite significant. This is a very broad overview, and we also collected data on a number of other topics, including time spent volunteering, the costs of volunteering, motivations and barriers, well-being benefits, how organisations recruit and retain volunteers, corporate volunteering, a lot of other topics. So feel free to have a look at the final reports, which are available on the National Strategy website under the Research tab, or in the Research section of the National Strategy for a bit more information on that. We also published a series of volunteering research papers. So this was an initiative very early on of the National Strategy for Volunteering Research Working Group, the aim being to capture existing evidence on a range of topics related to volunteering, with a key focus on policy and practice insights. So very practical, kind of focused research projects. We ended up with 22 peer-reviewed papers, which summarise literature on a very wide array of topics: volunteer retention, corporate volunteering, motivations to volunteer, measuring volunteer workforces, the history of volunteering, and a number of other topics. To ensure the implications of this research were really brought out, both in the development of the national strategy and for policymakers and practitioners in the ecosystem, each paper included a key insights section at the top, which provided a very brief summary of the key takeaways. And I've included an example of a key insights section on the slide to the right. So very practical focused research initiative there. And these papers are also available on the National Strategy website under the Research tab, if you're curious about them as well. So where is all this research in the strategy? I pulled out a few sections. Research is really kind of embedded or weaved throughout most sections of the strategy, but there are a couple that I thought I'd bring to your attention. We included a snapshot of the volunteering in Australia research, as well as a case for change section in the national strategy. Those are the first two screenshots on the slide, which really give a sense of the current state and where we're starting from in 2023 with the national strategy. So very research focused section there. You also notice that an evidence-based approach is the first principle of the national strategy. And we also include a recommendation on research and explore the research environment for volunteering in strategic objective 3.3, commit to strategic investment. There's also a more comprehensive research section, which in a bit more detail summarizes the research program that we undertook as part of the development of the strategy. Research is also embedded within each strategic objective. And I thought I'd just give a bit of a quick overview of kind of the anatomy of a strategic objective in the document. So you'll see that each strategic objective, and I've just pulled out strategic objective 1.2 here as an example. Each objective has, under the title, a quick summary of the objective, section on the purpose of the objective, a current state section, which provides just a summary of where we're starting, and a supporting evidence section that outlines what we've heard through consultations from expertise and through research. So this is where kind of a bulk of the research is referenced in the strategy. So in particular, this supporting evidence section is kind of where you might want to look to have a look at some of the evidence that underpins each of the strategic objectives. This research really informed the development of the strategy in two ways. And again, I've just pulled up a couple of examples here to kind of dissect and have a look at where the research comes in. So firstly, findings were used to corroborate what we heard from the ecosystem. Our research added a lot of dimension and detail to the strategic objectives and also highlighted potential ways that we might work towards achieving some of these objectives. I've pulled out as an example, strategic objective 1.2, make volunteering inclusive and accessible. So this was the recommendation we heard very loud and clear during the consultation phases for the strategy. And so the core design team was very interested in ensuring that the focus of this objective was informed and led by consultations and by those we engaged. So here we've referenced research on barriers to volunteering, reasons for not volunteering, rates of volunteering among different demographic groups, etc., to back up this point with representative data and to kind of make the case for it within the strategy. So if you're looking to use this objective, there's some really good research there that you can have a look at. But secondly, the findings were also used to highlight areas that weren't always represented in our participatory design process. So there were a few of the strategic objectives that were more research-led. And I've put on the screen strategic objective 2.1, diversify the understanding of volunteering, as an example there. So this is something we certainly heard during consultations, and we made sure that, for example, First Nations groups and cultural or faith-based groups were reached in targeted consultations. But this was also something we heard from researchers was under-examined, and the research we had on volunteering in, for example, First Nations communities and in cultural or faith-based groups gave us a lot more detail on this. And so this was an example where research helped to guide the formulation of the strategic objectives as well. And we've cited a lot of evidence from one of our volunteering research papers under that strategic objective, which is definitely worth a look at as well. So that's a very brief overview of how research evidence informed the national strategy, but we're also keen to ensure that we bring this evidence-based approach into the implementation phase moving forward. So you'll certainly hear more from us as we move ahead. But yeah, I'll leave it there for now, and I'll pass back over to Sue to tell us a bit about next steps.
Thank you, Jack. Yeah, we're going to open up shortly to Q&A, so please do pop some questions in the Q&A function. Or put them in the chat. We have both enabled on this webinar. I can see a couple in there in the Q&A already. I noticed that a few people were asking about the slides. We will circulate the slides after the webinar, so you'll have full access to them. And we'll give links to all the sources of research and evidence which Jack has just mentioned. But I did just want to recap before we open up to Q&A, just a quick reminder of what's happening next. You've seen this slide already. I started off with it, but it's our kind of next step slide. So these are the 4 core activities in the establishment phase, and we would love you all to engage with us on taking these forward. But as I said earlier, please do explore how the national strategy can be useful for you and your organisations. It's designed to be a useful document. There are lots of great initiatives, programmes, reforms already happening which contribute to the national strategy for volunteering and contributing to the vision. You know, we do not have a blank piece of paper, nor would we want to have one. There's I think a kaleidoscope of amazing activity and innovation already taking place, and I think the purpose of the national strategy is, as I said earlier, is to be a helpful guide and to leverage all that activity so that we can individually and collectively secure a better future for volunteering in Australia. But it is now time for Q&A. I think Jack and I are going to keep our cameras on for this. And I might go to Jack to see if there is a good starting question.
Yeah, well, I guess I'll move kind of in order for now. So we have a question, how is it intended for the strategy to be implemented and monitored?
Yes, so so I mean, one of there is a strong intention to monitor. So was it about monitoring and evaluation? Jack?
It asks how it's implemented and monitored, but I think talking about the monitoring and evaluation would be a good, good response.
So, I mean, and just to say a bit more, so two of the key activities in this establishment phase, one is the establishment of a monitoring and evaluation framework. So that's going to be a very important piece of work to get right, which will then, guide the next 10 years. And something, Jack and I have also been thinking about in that context is to make sure that we have the data and the research to support that monitoring and evaluation process. And then in terms of implementation, again, a key task for this next phase is the first of three-year action plans. So we had lots of ideas for actions that came up during the co-design process. We've not lost those, we've captured them, but really we want to co-design this next phase to have an action plan with clear accountabilities to really guide us over the next 3 years. Jack, is there another question? And do feel free, you can answer questions too, if you would like, but I'm happy to.
It will do, so I'll jump in where I can. I'm just, we're getting a lot of really good questions, so I'm still getting used to the Q&A function, unfortunately, so sorry to everyone if I mess that up. We have another question. Can we advise if we'll consider an easy to read document or other ways to make the strategy more accessible? I suppose could be good to talk a bit about that.
Yeah. And I mean, yes, is the answer to that question. The plan is to do both an easy to read version, but perhaps kind of ones which are helpful for particular groups of stakeholder. So it's one of Sarah Wilson's tasks when she comes back from leave is to develop those kind of additional resources to support the Q&A. There is a summary at the start of the national strategy document, but the actual document is, Jack, you correct me, but I think it's over 80 pages long.
It is.
So, I mean, I think the summary at the start is, clearly the, most important things for you to know from the strategy. But yes, there is an intention to produce some more accessible resources.
And sort of to jump off that, because I think it's sort of related, there was a question about practical examples of how we can use the strategy in the workplace. And this might be just to flag this as an area we're looking at, because it will depend, I think, on your role in the organization or where you sort of sit in the ecosystem. So we're sort of interested in looking in progressing with that, having some advice for if you're in policy or if you're developing a volunteer program or whatever your role is, that might look a bit different. Did you have anything to add to that, Sue?
Only, I mean, it would be helpful to hear from people about what would be useful. And then we can explore how to, meet that need.
We have a question, how does lived experience fit into the national strategy? And I think in particular it'd be useful to talk about lived experience in the development, but perhaps going forward as well.
So I think it's something which we were mindful of during the development. I think we would benefit from some advice on how to improve that going forward into the implementation. So yeah, I think it's an area where we're certainly committed to drawing on lived experience. And when we had conversations at the start of the strategy development process about what did we think evidence was, we took a very broad view of evidence, which, I mean, Jack's focused on the research evidence, but we also drew from lived experience, expertise in its various forms. So yes, I think it's something which we're keen to do well as we move into the implementation phase. Sorry, Jack, I'm relying on you to look through all the Q&A.
Sorry, no worries. I'm scanning as we speak, so if I go a bit quiet, apologies again in advance. We have a question here. How does the strategy accommodate for, they specifically asked about increased need for emergency management volunteering driven by climate change, but it could be useful to talk about how we are looking at that issue, the need for volunteers, and how the number of people volunteering will fit into the strategy as we go forward.
Yeah. Well, we do have something I didn't talk about, was the indicators of success, which is another part of the strategy, which where we were keen to kind of really bring to life what difference the strategy might make. And there we highlighted 3 indicators of success. One which was around improving the volunteer experience. So volunteer, which we'll have to look at how best we measure it, but could be, certainly around volunteer satisfaction, but there could be other measures. And then there was a indicator of success about flowing from that there would be more volunteers in the future. And then a third indicator of success was, I might have to get Jack to help me on this.
Ensuring that volunteering is comprehensively valued.
Yes. Yeah.
So measuring different facets of the value of volunteering in Australia in general.
Yeah.
I thought I just might quickly add, it just occurred to me there might be some questions about particular types of volunteering in emergency management or other sectors. We did sort of want to make sure that this was a strategy for volunteering in general. So it's rare that we reference particular sectors or particular types of volunteering in the strategy. Though this is something that I think it could be useful. We'll be sort of considering what different initiatives might work for different sectors in the next phase when we're looking at the action plans. So something to keep an eye on as well. And just a general note about the strategy. There was a question here about, I'm interested in if there are any initiatives regarding support for volunteers' psychological health, such as EAP for workplaces, and where would this fall into? I might just quickly jump in. There's one of the strategic objectives, 1.3, on ensuring volunteering isn't exploitative. That will be where those sorts of issues, including psychological health or psychological hazard management of volunteers, will be considered. And we did have a volunteering research paper on this issue as well. So definitely something that was brought to our attention, and I think it would be something to look at in the action plan phase. And that's where it would fall, would be under strategic objective 1.3. Anything else on that one, Sue?
I mean, only that we did hear some good examples of how that, is being taken forward last year, but would love to hear of other examples and initiatives which are really focusing on the health and the psychological health of volunteers.
We've had a couple of questions here that I'm just, grouping a few together on taking the strategy forward and how people can be involved in the strategy.
Yes, so we're at a very practical level. We are at the moment, we've only just clarified our contract to get the funds for the establishment phase. we're recruiting for a new national strategy director, because Sarah is going to move to one side as an advisor while she progresses with her studies. But the intention is that there will be a range of opportunities to engage in this next stage. We've made a commitment and it's in the national strategy, and this is, we're absolutely think this is the right way to go, that the 3-year action plan will be co-designed. So we need to really reach back out to everyone and, take forward a co-design process for the development of that first 3-year action plan. I can't be specific as yet as to what that will look like, but it will certainly involve, various opportunities to engage going forward. We're also thinking about, how we need to evolve the process, the groups that were put in place last year. So we had a National Strategy Council and a series of working groups which helped build the strategy. We're very keen to have a kind of a framework like that to go forward, but it won't be exactly the same. I think as we move from development into implementation, we need to think about what those kind of building blocks are in terms of getting expertise and insight as the project goes into implementation. So it's a kind of watch this space, I think, on this. If you haven't already registered for national strategy updates, there's a subscriber button on the website, please do. And I can only, not very specific as yet, but there will be opportunities to take this next stage forward. I don't know if you had anything to add to that, Jack.
No, I think that's everything. Thanks, Sue.
That's where we're at.
Yes, it is a very watch this space at the moment, but we will be reaching out as well. We have a question about a specific question, strategic objective 2.2 on the public perception of volunteering. They ask how we might agree or unite on how this should look. And this is sort of it goes into what will be happening in the next stage. But I wonder if you could talk a bit about that.
Yeah.
So, I have a couple
so I think again, can't be too specific at the moment because we need to do the work. But I think there will need to be certainly an element of awareness raising that takes place, in the next phase, whether that's, some form of campaign but really, to elevate the variety and the diversity of volunteering. So I think, again, not a lot specific to say as yet, but I think that will be, an important aspect of taking forward that strategic objective. I think our view has been that, there's not hard definitions around some of this. There's a fluidity around what counts as volunteering, and certainly, in terms of, and this is a strong theme in the national strategy about what people understand as volunteering, and they may not call it volunteering. So, and I think we're very, aligned with that as an approach, that we really want to, welcome in all forms of volunteering, whether it is named or understood as volunteering.
Yeah, I think as well, just to jump in before we move on, the sense that I got during the development was that there was an interest in promoting the breadth of volunteering a bit better. So there's in some ways a narrow public view of what is volunteering is. And I know many of the people here will be have all very different types of volunteering roles and from different types of organizations that there might be lower awareness of. So I think that seems to be a strong emphasis when this strategic objective was being developed. But as well, that's open to we'll explore that a bit more. There was a lot of interest in that one. So during the development of the next action plan, there'll be scope to kind of shape that as well.
Yeah. I might ask you a question, Jack, since there's one come up.
Sure.
I've now got the questions open, sorry. So there was a question around the research finding that there was need for volunteers in many areas and gaps in volunteering. But the question was, did you find where there was a glut or waiting lists? And I just wondered if you could talk to the kind of mismatch in volunteering that I think came out of the organisation survey.
Yeah, so the way we kind of looked at this, we had a question in the survey about what type of organisation people who currently volunteer for. And then we got a breakdown of sort of the proportions of organisations people are volunteering in. And then we asked people who indicated they didn't volunteer what type of organisation they'd be interested in volunteering in if they were to volunteer. And we kind of compared those, which gives us sort of an indication of where there might be, a lot of interest in an area where there's actually a small number of current volunteers or volunteering opportunities. It's not a perfect proxy for that, but it's close. And then where there's need for more volunteers or where there's fewer people volunteering and there isn't as much interest from prospective volunteers, we could understand them as. I think that the most stark one was animal welfare from memory. So relatively small number of animal welfare volunteers, but quite a large proportion. I think it was about 30% of people who don't volunteer indicating that they'd be interested in volunteering in animal welfare. So to answer that kind of where there's a glut question, it could be there. Although I think in some ways that speaks to the objective on the public perceptions of volunteering. It might just be people can imagine what an animal welfare role might be like, or maybe they can't. Maybe there's a lot of work in animal welfare where there is demand for volunteers, just in types of roles that people aren't as aware of. That's the sort of one that comes to mind. And then there's a lot of areas where there is kind of a decent matchup. I don't have the research in front of me, but we do a short summary of that in the National Strategy document under research as well. But definitely that's something we'd like to interrogate a bit more. There is a question here on, they ask what our advice is for aligning local or jurisdictional level volunteering strategies with the national strategy process. And also how we might consider learnings from future sub-national level strategies as we go forward.
Yeah, that's a very good and difficult question, but I think it's something we're very mindful of last year, and drew and were aware of the jurisdictional, certainly at the state and territory level, strategies that already existed. But going forward, I think it will be an important part of implementing the national strategy, and looking at how it can align and complement strategies at the state and territory level, but also at the local level. It will not be an easy piece of work, but I think it will certainly, at a minimum, it should be a learning process. So we should be, learn at the national level what's going on at the state and territory level and the local level, and then really look at how we can align that work perhaps around particular strategic objectives, but it is an important piece of work to be taken forward. Jack, did you have anything more to add on that?
Yeah, just to add, I suppose that this is an area of interest under, I think it was strategic objective 3.1 on the part of that, the recognising volunteering as a cross-portfolio issue in government. Something that was of more immediate interest, in particular from government as we consulted, was getting a clear sense of the way responsibility is divided at the different levels of government. And I think that might be something that might need to be a project that we undertake either during this phase or in the action plan phase, that might give us a better idea of how to align the national strategy with more local strategies. In particular, you know, there may be parts of the implementation of the national strategy that will start happening at the state and territory level might be leading on that, you know, in terms of implementation. And I think when we have a good sense of that, we'll have a bit more clarity of what should go in a state or territory strategy to align with the national strategy, and what will be undertaken, what will be led at the national level. And then so I think that might give us a bit more clarity on that. Just noting, yes, it is a tricky question at this stage. But yes.
And I mean, just, you know, in part of the process last year did involve at the federal level across government set of workshops. And, you know, there was recognition and conversations there about also making sure that, you know, there is the, as Jack said, the sort of alignment and the discussion about responsibilities at the various, you know, it's about across, but it's also about the various levels of government as well, and who should be taking the lead on particular initiatives.
Great. We have another question here on strategic objective 3.3, commit to strategic investment. And they've asked us to give an example or explore what that might look like.
Sorry, what was that, Jack? 3.3?
3.3, commit to strategic investment.
Yeah. Well, we've seen it as operating at various levels. So it can be strategic investment within an organization. But we've also been, you know, and this was as an example, part of our pre-budget submission at the national level is encouraging the federal government to think about strategic investment. So it's, you know, I think there is, you know, now that we have a national strategy, we can think more strategically about investment in volunteering, you know, and think about where money might be better spent. And that's, you know, that is a really useful aspect of the national strategy. But it can be used at various levels. And I noted there was a comment, I think, in the Q&A about how, you know, how good it is that we've got this evidence base now for, you know, seeking investment at other levels as well. But Jack, did you have any other thoughts on that one?
I think that mostly covers it. I just thought I'd so a part of the thinking with this strategic objective, I understand it's a bit of a tricky one in a lot of ways, but the thinking and the input that we got that shaped it was really that there's not a good understanding of the different functions that make volunteering work, and some of them, and that results in some not so strategic funding, you know. So as an example, it isn't worth funding, you know, if we're not funding research, then how can we fund programs that will improve the volunteering experience if we don't have, you know. So it's kind of just making sure that we have appropriate resourcing for all the pieces that end up culminating in a volunteering program, as an example. And I think a lot of the thinking was about the way that the government funds volunteering, but there will definitely be a lot of work on the way that organizations can work together to fund parts of the volunteering ecosystem as well. And that will be, I think, a sort of ongoing conversation. But it is a really good question.
We're at 5-1. So we should probably hand back over to Mark shortly. There's still lots more questions coming through, and you know, we will capture all the questions because they are going to be very helpful in, you know, in taking this next step. I did notice a quick one coming up, Jack, which said, can we look at the research by sector? And I know that's an aspiration that we have, is to do some more sector analysis. So I don't know if you wanted to comment on that one before I hand back to Mark.
Well, just a couple of things. Firstly, the research, the 2 surveys that I mentioned as part of the Volunteering in Australia research, the data for those is public. That was really important principle of that research project. So you can access the raw data if you'd like to do any analysis. And we will also be digging a bit more into it. We're looking at a bit of analysis by sector and possibly more ambitious aim to have profiles by sector. So, you know, why people volunteer, who volunteers, how satisfied they are with their volunteering by sector. At some point, watch this space as well.
Thanks, Jack. I am going to hand back over to Mark now. Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, Sue. Thanks, Jack. Australia has a national strategy for volunteering, a critical piece of Australia's national social infrastructure. As with the success of communities being predicated upon active engagement, participation, and innovation, so the success of the national strategy will be reliant upon active participation, engagement, and innovation as we move forward. And we look forward to engaging with all of you as we move into this establishment phase and then the 3-year action plans moving forward from that point. As Sue mentioned, we will make the recording and slides available. The National Strategy research is available on the National Strategy for Volunteering website. I know you can't see my face. I'm lurking in the shadows. My camera's not working. We encourage you to subscribe for all the national strategy updates. Stay involved, stay engaged with the process. Keep in mind also that we're almost upon National Volunteer Week, and there are an enormous amount of resources and support materials for National Volunteer Week available on the Volunteering Australia website and the websites of the foundation members, the state and territory peak bodies. A lot of organisations get deeply involved in National Volunteer Week, and that's such an exciting thing to do. We've got an interesting year ahead, and we look forward to walking together with you as we develop the establishment of the national strategy, as we work through National Volunteer Week, and as we celebrate all that volunteering is in this country. I thank you all for coming. Thanks for your participation. Look forward to catching up with you soon.